I've spent 20 years trying to understand what happened to my sister that autumn, and I'm no closer to an answer. Sometimes I wonder if that's the point, that some experiences aren't meant to be understood from the outside, only witnessed, like watching someone you love have a conversation in a language you don't speak, except the other participant is, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Emma and I were staying at our grandmother's farmhouse in western Maine that October, helping clear it out after she passed. The property had been in our family for generations, perched on the edge of an apple orchard that had gone wild decades ago. The trees were gnarled and untamed, their branches reaching toward the house like arthritic fingers. We'd been close once, Emma and I, but life has a way of putting distance between people. She'd moved to Seattle for work while I'd stayed in Boston. We saw each other at holidays, traded occasional texts, but that was it. When we inherited the farmhouse together, it was the first time we'd spent more than a day in each other's company in years. The first few days were ordinary enough. We sorted through old photographs, argued about which pieces of furniture were worth keeping, and remembered summer visits when we were kids. But something changed after we found the box of letters in the attic. They were love letters written to our grandmother in 1943 by a young man named Thomas Wheeler. He'd grown up on the neighboring farm and enlisted after Pearl Harbor. The last letter was dated 3 days before he died in Italy. We knew our grandmother had eventually married our grandfather in 1946, but she'd never mentioned Thomas. Emma became obsessed with the letters. She'd sit in the old rocking chair by the kitchen window, reading them over and over. I noticed she started taking walks in the orchard at dusk, something she'd always been too scared to do when we were kids. She said the light was perfect then, whatever that meant. The first time I saw her talking to herself among the apple trees, I didn't think much of it. We all process grief differently, and maybe this was her way of mourning our grandmother. But then the conversations became more frequent and more animated. She'd laugh at jokes I couldn't hear, gesture to empty air, turn her head to listen to words that weren't there. "Who are you talking to out there?" I asked one evening as she came in, cheeks flushed despite the autumn chill. "Thomas," she said, as casual as if she were telling me she'd been on the phone with a friend. "He's been showing me how the orchard used to look before it went wild. Did you know there used to be beehives down by the stone wall?" I checked the local history records later. There had been beehives there, but they'd been removed in 1950. There was no way Emma could have known that. The night before we were supposed to leave, I woke to the sound of laughter floating up from the orchard. It was past midnight, and a heavy fog had rolled in from the hills. I found Emma's bed empty and ran outside, terrified she'd gotten lost in the mist. I found her in the center of the orchard, dancing, not just swaying or twirling, but properly dancing, like someone at a formal ball. Her arms were positioned as if held by an invisible partner, and she moved with perfect grace through the complicated steps of what looked like a waltz. Her face was radiant with joy, but her expression made my blood run cold. She was looking up at someone tall, someone I couldn't see. "Emma!" I called out, my voice shaking. "Emma, please, come inside." She turned toward me, but her eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Can't you hear the music?" she asked. "It's the same song they played at the harvest dance in 43. Then she turned back to her invisible partner and continued dancing, humming a tune I'd never heard before. I stood there in the fog watching my sister dance with some entity, and I realized something that haunts me to this day. I wasn't afraid of whatever she was dancing with. I was afraid of the space between us, the gulf between her reality and mine, growing wider with every step of that ethereal waltz. Emma moved into the farmhouse permanently after that week. She restored the orchard, planted new trees alongside the old ones, and even reinstalled beehives by the stone wall. She never married, but she was never alone. Sometimes when I visit, I catch her smiling at empty chairs or laughing at unheard jokes. She seems happy, happier than I've ever known her to be. But I can't help wondering about that space between us, about the things she sees that I never will, about how two people can stand in the same orchard, breathe the same air, share the same blood, and yet live in entirely different worlds. I've learned to live with not understanding. After all, love letters aren't meant to be read by anyone except their intended recipient. Maybe some hauntings work the same way.